KOGAA is an interdisciplinary practice in the fields of architecture, urban planning, interior, and product design. The studio is based in the Czech Republic and was started in 2015 by Alexandra Georgescu, Tomasz Kozelski, and Otto Stachlik. Though not only limited to one specific type of project, what Koga is really famous for is their slow development approach to building and architecture through their self-started lab that constantly tackles the issue of abandoned or inactive structures and adapts them into substitute functions. So I have Thomas here with me on this episode, and this slow architecture concept will be the topic of today's discussion. I think Thomas later will explain through some of the successful projects they've done in the past. So thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you for having us. Just to complete the image on our studio, right now there is approximately 10 of us. In the studio, we have two branches, one in Brno, in the second biggest city, and then the smaller branch in Prague, in the capital. We started the office almost 6 years ago, and right now we become one of the practices which is considered as a specialist for adaptive reuse in the country. The fact was basically like the starting point when it was really difficult for a young starting studio to get a grasp on a bigger project which would be actually meaningful on the level of society. So we had to do it our own, to become our own investor, and that's how we started. We found in Brno like old distillery from 19th century, which was already unused, and it was just before a demolition. And we started dialogue. We managed to preserve that building, and we managed to refurbish it and start running it as a place, as a hub for like different starting companies in terms of, let's call them makers, like people who wanted to know if they can do a business on their own, if they can produce, I don't know, food, if they can produce like IT technology, if they can produce like woodworks, for example. And we were giving them like the background, and this project became very successful. And we found out that we have a determinant in what we want to do, and basically based on this distillery project, the form, the meaning of the architectural design of our studio was established.
Yeah, and you were saying earlier that Brno happened to be the perfect ground to start new projects and try new initiatives and also maybe start a new career, right?
Yes, it's true. Brno has basically three schools which are producing architects and designers. It's a rather younger city, but it's also a city with like a very strong architectural history, and therefore like it is kind of really good testing ground for architects. So there is a plenty of new gastro places opening, so it's very easy to catch the wave, to find somebody who's like willing to open a restaurant or open a small cafe, and they can become your first project, And the gastro, actually, that's quite an interesting thing. The gastro is generating very much progressing quality level. So a lot of people who are coming to open a restaurant here, they need to push their level as much as possible, and they are like imprinting into their demands and assignment to the architects. And that's when the architects are actually learning how to kind of take a better assignment and how to demand more from the assignment. And this kind of like let's say symbiosis between the gastro and architectural design for the young professionals is very fruitful, I would say. And the second thing is the city used to be a capital of textile production before actually the move of production towards Asia. And that actually caused a lot of abandoned brownfields, which are like placed within the city center. And here comes a lot of opportunities how we can start playing with like existing built environment and try to turn it into something meaningful. So
Right.
I would say Brno is very, very good place to actually start being an architect.
Perfect. So I think a lot of us are not that familiar yet with the concept of slow development. So it would be great if maybe you can tell us a little bit more about slow architecture and how does it compare to fast architecture?
Slow development, we started using this term like related with the distillery project when we didn't have enough money to invest at once. And that actually caused the fact that like every step we were doing, like every new room we were refurbishing, we waited. We had the time to actually wait what is going to be demanded by the society, by the environment, by the neighborhood of the street where the distillery was located. And we were having a space which was like the main space, the big one, and we started with the fact that we just cleaned it up. Then we made a few projections, and we didn't have further plans for it because the investment would be rather big. But as we were waiting, as we were like keeping it around in the function we were able to manage, suddenly came a local cinema which got into the restoration. They said, guys, we need like a place for a few months to settle down because our building is being restored. And that was the perfect moment. So we just gave them the space. They helped us to furbish it because they had another funding. And that was the moment when this space became like officially usable with like proper windows, with like acoustic wall finishes and so on. And that was the slow development. It was like you were waiting for what organically comes to you and what is organically demanded from your project. So that's how it actually really becomes uh, let's call it a city maker, an attractor that is referring to whatever the city needs. And on contrary, there you have like the classic, let's call it, if we call it like the slow development, then you have the classic development, which is just based on the few steps. You buy a land, you get a project, you get a building permission, you build it, you sell, next one. And this is like very quick process, which is not referring to the final user. It's not referring to the health of the area. I'm not saying that there are no good development projects, but the process is a little bit too quick, and it's more about solving the problems related to with the legal part, with like the fulfilling the legislative, but it's not really focusing on how to make the area I'm in healthier.
Mm, yeah. And I guess you did touch on being open to adapting has the benefit of not having to put too much capital up front, but you can keep adding as you go. And also it helps you avoid putting like the wrong function to a space because what works now may not work like 10 years from now, right? But I guess I'm wondering, in what other aspects can being open to constantly adapting be beneficial?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like the fact that you are able, the adaptation is not infinite. Yeah, like so, you're making a steps. I would call it like we created a certain chart. So whenever we deal with an old building, we chart the spaces of the building. Let's say from A to F, as in school, and the F spaces are really like dysfunctional spaces which needs a lot of investment, a lot of technologies, and they are degrading. So like they're constantly falling apart. The longer you keep them as they are, the sooner you're going to need to raise the investment to actually use them. Meanwhile, the A is probably a space that is immediately usable. Like you have windows, you have heating, you have water, everything is perfectly fine, it's not leaking. And once we go to the old building, we basically give to each of the space this kind of mark. And then we're making the steps, but the step is not like that we have a space which is marked, for example, as a C, and we make the jump to the A level. We keep it as a C for a little bit. We see what is the opportunity of the space to work as a C. But then eventually when we find out that there is a like user who is interested in like turning into the B level, and we actually are able to get funds and it has like a long-term prospect, we make the investment to turn it into a B. But then we are waiting again, like seeing if it works as a B, if it's demanded as a B, or if actually there is a push to turn it into an A. And then again, we make another investment and turn it into an A. But it's very essential that you need to be sensitive in understanding the buildings. Each building has a history, it has a construction, and the structure of the built environment has to be perfectly respected. So we're trying to open, we're trying to make the spaces very interconnected. We are trying to clean it up to understand how it can work, but there is a limit which you cannot go behind at the moment when you like push the building behind its functionality. Either you need to put a much more financial effort to make it usable, or actually you destroy the building. So there you have to be very careful.
Right. Because if you're constantly adapting, then there's a risk of never stepping out of the project, right?
Yes, but like for further projects which are like now more often coming to us, we're recently about to finish a creative hub in Brno. There is a South Moravian Innovation Center. South Morava is like this region. So in this region, the Innovation Center decided to support all the creative industry, and they created a hub where you can apply. You're getting the special services. They are telling you basically how to start your business, and they're providing you also with the spaces. In the end, here we found out that as a assigned project, we need to provide the spaces that you're renting. They're very clear. This is a basic thing. This is a classic real estate scheme. But next to it, there are spaces which are weird. Like I put it in a brackets, weird. Um, these are spaces which are keeping inside of them the ability to hybridize. You can turn them and shift them all the time as you want, and people can find what is their perfect way to be used. We created, for example, like a common kitchenettes, which are open. They are part of a bigger space, and it doesn't matter if you're actually using it for cooking, or if you're actually turning into a bar, or it's going to be a place for a DJ set, or it's actually a podium for giving a lecture. Um, we established that there is everything, all the infrastructure you need, but we are not saying that this is a kitchen and you have to use it only as a kitchen. Here, your creatives, it's related with another spaces, it's opened via some openings, and it's up to you if you're going to put a neon light on it and you open it from 8 p.m. till the midnight and you turn it into a club, because this space is going to be able to handle it. And you can learn if you want to have a bar here or if you actually prefer to have the kitchen.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that because sometimes when you make things too pretty, it might not be as useful, because like the users will be scared to even touch the furniture, for example. But if it is slightly less pretty, maybe you can intentionally show like a sign of use on the furniture, then the users would want to like move it around the space, for example, so that they can work better, tailored to their own needs. Yeah, they will be wanting to make and break in that space even more, so it will be more productive, right?
Yes, it's true. In this case, we could afford it because it's supposed to be for creative industry. So we're expecting that like the people who are going to be coming there are creatives. But sometimes the people want the finished thing. And so it's like also like very important to distinguish what kind of group of people, of the users, is going to come into the space and who's going to be evaluating and saying, hey, this is finished and we like it here, and or this is unfinished, but we still like it here. So this is also like quite essential thing of our work.
Hmm. So, what kinds of things do we need to be mindful of when we do such renovation project, or when we install a new use to an existing architecture?
That's definitely like first part that you're doing automatically, like basically describing what the building can handle, how is
Mm.
it connected. I mean, like speaking of a grids, for example, if you have enough canalization, understanding a little bit what the project was and what do you want it to become, that you understand the legal part of it. You know, like let's say it's a very basic thing, but like the amount of toilets by the law, you know, just to be sure that you can fit this kind of totally essential things in it. And then there we are starting like a moment when we are researching on what is the environment around. Is it a place that is accessed by people from 10 minutes far away or from 2 hours far away if they are coming with the cars or if they are walking like as pedestrians? And what the part or what the location actually needs is it sometimes it might be a housing, sometimes it's just a space for the environment which it doesn't have, because we have a plenty of streets which are fully uh, designed and specified by traffic engineers. So suddenly you have like a narrow pedestrian parts, then you have spaces for cars, spaces for trams, and suddenly you don't have a squares, and you're spending hours and hours in an urban environment, and you actually realize you don't have the quality urban space. And maybe you can take a building and you can take the yard and say, hey, you know what, I want to turn the yard which is prominent or private, and I want to turn it public. Just give it to the people who are passing on the streets and they are tired and they want to sit a little bit in the greenery and take a breath. It can be private, at least for a few hours a day. It can be public, sorry, for a few hours a day. So even these are like very needed functions, you know, and people need to learn that they can come there for a few hours a day. They come, they sit, they make a yoga, they just read or do whatever they feel like, and it's space for them, for the environment. And this is much better than like doing something for tourists. Tourists come for once, but if you're like creating for the location, you're like improving the quality of life there. So this is another very important part that we are doing. And then of course you need to study the function that you're going to be placing in, to find out what the function need, to find out how you can alter it. And for that it's really important to actually study the international market, if I call it like that, or like the international references, because if you're adapting to the building, it's not enough just to look in kind of like a typology book and say, exactly, this should be the classroom, because you might not have these spaces. So you are looking for an option how you alter the function, and that why you need to study all the world.
Yeah, yeah. Like a well done research will inform a better decision, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess the next question would be, since we've talked about putting this adaptive mindset into building practice, how about using that mindset in your day to day practice? As I believe that you sort of instill that reusing mindset in your office as well as a way of thinking.
Well, the reuse, the thing is actually that we have two departments, I would say. Like one is focused more on the architecture and urbanism, and the second one is interior. The interior is actually doing quite a lot of exhibitions, and the interior department is actually also running the Brno Design Days, which is quite a big festival. The thing is that a lot of installations which we did were always faced with the fact, hey, we are you make the installation, you make the exhibition, but then you have one day to remove everything and it's going to be thrown away. And this was a big problem. We couldn't live with the fact that you invest a lot of money into preparing an architectural installation, And then from day to day, the products, I don't mean the exhibits, but I mean like the things you brought there to make it is going to be demolished and thrown away. So we start looking for the possibilities how to reuse these things. And we started in our office. So like our office is from 80% recycled exhibitions. And right now, thanks to the fact that our office has as a project the social reactor, which is basically NGO company that is taking care of hardly adaptable or hardly rentable spaces. So if you have, for example, a developer, the developer has a building, the building is in a heritage protection. He doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't want to invest into restoring the building. He can call us, we take care of the building, we find the tenants, we find a way how to communicate with the heritage protection. So we have multiple buildings that are being managed by us, and we're using all this kind of like demolitions pieces or like demolition materials to be reused in them. So we basically created quite quite a significant stream of like reusing of the material in the built environment, and from interiors all the way till actually the real demolitions of like a big buildings. If there is a like metal structures, we can find a way how to reuse it somewhere else. So this is like how we're trying to reuse from the smaller elements into the biggest ones.
Right. That way, you don't only contain material sustainability within just one project, but you can also use it across your other projects.
I would say maybe here is like one very important part. We are just not like trying to find right now, finding a solution for something that was already built or done and find how to use it. But we are also learning how to actually design for the future that afterwards is like very easy to reuse. And that's what we learn through the exhibitions. So like you should always design in the way that you can imagine what is going to be the next step of the material. If you cut something into two small pieces and it's very specific shape, it's very hard to use it later on for some another function. So we're like really trying to see the opportunity that we're using an elements that can be very easily reused. If not by us, then maybe by somebody else.
Yeah. And in the case of building, it is maybe predicting the next function or functions right after that.
There, I would say there is like a big example in the north and western countries in Europe, which are like very much determining how the typologies should be looking like, um, to be able to turn into something else in the future. I think it's in Sweden where they have the restriction on parking houses, that actually the parking house has to have more or significantly higher ceilings than as it's demanded by a law. And it's for the fact that if actually the city grows and the pedestrian area grows as well, then this kind of structures, which are really mostly made from a concrete and they are like difficult to be demolished, they can very easily turn into a social housing. That you can fit all the air conditioning, all the installations into the building very easily. And uh, basically, you don't need to demolish anything. And that is very, very good thinking, like the hybridization of the building for the further usage as expectation of the urban growth.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to see a city in itself as a slow development entity on its own, because a city constantly adds new buildings, then removing old ones, then renovating some. So on that regard, how do you see the role of an architect changing, like from the past to now and then later in the future? Mm.
And for me, I think like the past was very important because like you can see how the architecture become popularized, and suddenly, thanks to, and let's call it like, there was the Dutch movement, right? Like of all the star architects coming from Holland, as Rem Koolhaas related with Zaha Hadid and so on. And there was like a massive popularization of the architecture, and the wave was continuing, let's say, till 2000, 2010. And suddenly, like, everybody wanted to be an architect. Everybody was like trying to think architecturally, and that's brilliant because that's bringing the architecture in even much smaller scale, and it's like becoming omnipresent topic. Like, is this an actually architecture? Shouldn't we do it a little bit more in designer way? So that was very important. But I would say that like we are slowly at the end of the time of this kind of like big architects doing massive buildings and this kind of chapels. They're going to stay here with us, but this is not going to be the main topic. And I think right now we're like seeing that there is a transformation of the thinking into how we can adapt the environment around us. So many new square meters are being built every hour. I spent 2 years living in China, in Beijing, and it was absolutely crazy. Like I think there was over 5,000 square meters being finished every hour in the period when I was staying there, and there was like extensive growth. And with this kind of consideration, I would say that maybe on the planet is already enough of buildings to settle all the people in like perfect conditions to live in. And we need to start thinking about the fact that the building is very heavy for the planet. It's very difficult process. It creates a lot of carbon traces. And maybe the next step is actually finding out how to use the buildings we have and how to build for the future buildings that we don't need to demolish anymore. Those are going to be buildings which are going to be much better designed, much better communicated between the investor and between the region and the city and the municipality. And there are going to be buildings that are going to be staying, and they're going to be as a piece of real nature. You know, it's something we have here. It's a resource, and we deal with it very carefully because we need to be careful in this kind of decision making. And I can see it all around at least Europe, that there is a more and more practices, architectural practices, focusing on questioning how to reuse the nowadays buildings and how to design in the way that their new buildings don't need to be demolished and they can last hundreds of years if we are like over positive, and they can utilize like a massive scale of functions. Or there are buildings that can be very easily not demolished but taken apart, collapsed, and for example transported somewhere else. So these are, for example, the topics, and I think the future is going to bring into the architecture. Next to it, you all, of course, have like how to implement the nature and the growth environment into the built one.
Yeah, I agree. And it can be as simple as rethinking or re-asking yourself if you really need to do something to a space, right? Or can you work something around it to minimize the impact? Yeah, so thank you so much for such an inspiration. I think this slow development concept is such a new term, but it is very much needed, especially now. I think there is a time and place for fast architecture. You know how China built a hospital in only a matter of weeks. That has a purpose on its own, but especially in an urban setting where there are not that many vacant land left, we should be thinking about reusing and adapting.
I totally agree with you. Like we are just, I'm now speaking about one approach. Of course, there are projects which needs to be still built, and they need to be built fast. On the other hand, we are having right now a project. We are doing a campus for a huge depository and research of one museum here in Czech. It's a massive place, and this approach, we call it like ultra slow development, because we were told by the director that we need to understand the museum as a places where which are containing things that shall remain hundreds and maybe thousands of years, and the best thing about them is to stay untouched. And it's a place which very much prefers not to be moved and to be tread gently. And that is also like very unique. I never experienced such an approach before. So like whatever we are designing, we are always thinking very carefully about what is going to be moved where and how to place it there, that it's going to stay there for another decades.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing. I hope everyone here can be inspired and start making such positive impact. Thank you. My pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.